Hello, I'm back and ready to read chapter 2 of Some of the Monkeys. We left off right here, and I'll begin reading. It was about 3 miles to the store, and I nearly ran Rowdy's legs off getting there. I was pretty sure when I told my grandpa about the monkey, he'd know what to do about it. My grandpa was one of those old, slow moving, boy loving kind of grandpas. We had been pals for as long as I can remember. He can do anything. He'd do anything he could for me, and I'd do anything I could for him. If you're looking at the outside of my grandpa, you wouldn't see very much. He was just about as big around the middle as he was tall. He didn't have much hair either, just a little around the edges, and it was gray and stiff as a wild hog's whiskers. He wore glasses, chewed star tobacco, and needed to shave about every 360 days a year. It was the middle of my inside it was the inside of my grandpa that really counted. He had a heart as big as a number 4 washtub, and inside that old wrinkled hide of his, it was enough of boy understanding for all the boys in the world. On entering the store, I saw Grandpa bent over behind the counter, setting canned goods on the shelf. He didn't hear me when I came in. Of course, I was barefooted and it didn't make any more noise than a lizard walking on a rail fence. I eased right up behind him and said in a much too loud voice, "Grandpa, Rowdy, trade a monkey." I saw my old grandpa flinch, just about like I had done when a wasp dabbed his fiery little dagger in me. He took his time turning around. Ducking his head, he looked over his glasses. Then he looked at Rowdy. Rowdy was just sitting there on his old rear looking up at Grandpa. His long ears were sticking straight up and his tongue was hanging out about a foot. Grandpa must have liked what he saw. He grinned a little and said, "That's okay."
I'm just checking on it with Randy, so
Okay.
doing good.
Yeah, very good. Sorry, I lost my spot. Rowdy was just sitting there on his rear looking up at Grandpa. His ears were sticking straight up and his tongue was hanging out about a foot. Grandpa must have liked what he saw. He grinned a little and said, "Now let's do that all over again, only this time don't talk so loud." "You mean you want me to go back outside, Grandpa, and come in again just like I did?" I asked. "No, no," Grandpa said, waving his hand. "You don't have to go back outside. Just say that all over again." "Oh," I said. I swallowed a couple of times and tried hard to control my voice. "Rowdy treed a monkey." Grandpa nodded his head and said, "Uh-huh. That's what I thought you said. I wanted to be sure though. Are you sure it was a monkey?" "Sure as I need a haircut, Grandpa," I said. "It was a monkey all right. It was a skinny tail, 4 long legs, and a baby-looking face and hair all over. Papa thinks it was a pet monkey that belonged to a fisherman, and it got away from him." Grandpa thought a second, then shaking his head, he said, "No, I don't think it belonged to a fisherman. Is one monkey all Rowdy treed?" "That's all I saw, Grandpa," I said, "but I believe there's something else around there. I heard a lot of noises." Grandpa's bushy eyebrows jumped straight up. "Noises?" he asked. "What kind of noises?" "I don't know what kind of noises they were, Grandpa," I said. "I usually hear all kinds of noises in the bottoms, and I usually know what's making them, but I've never heard anything like that before. It sounded like cries and squeals, barks and grunts, and everything else. It scared me into a running fit." Grandpa got all excited. He took off his glasses and I saw a twinkle in his friendly old eyes. Then very seriously, he said, "I'm pretty sure those noises you heard were more monkeys. It sure sounds like it from what I understand. There's probably about 30 of them." My eyes got as big as bur oak acorns. "30!" I exclaimed. "Boy, that's a lot of monkeys, Grandpa. Are you sure?" "I can't be positive," Grandpa said, "but I'd be willing to bet that the last bucket of sorghum molasses on it." "Grandpa, do you know something else about those monkeys?" I asked. Rearing back and looking as important as Rowdy did when he treats something, Grandpa said, "Sure, I know something about those monkeys. That's what grandpas are for, isn't it? To know things for boys." I grinned and said, "Yes, sir, I guess so." It didn't surprise me too much to find out that my grandpa knew something about the monkey. I was firmly convinced that he was the smartest man in those Ozark Hills, anyhow. He knew a little bit about everything. He knew where the best fishing holes were and the right kind of bait to use. He knew the best places to hunt and the right time to go fishing. Sorry, hunting. It didn't seem, though, that all good things my grandpa knew were things that I liked. Nope, sorry. It did seem, though, that all the good things my grandpa knew were all the things I liked. Pointing to the counter, Grandpa said, "Sit down and I'll tell you about it. Believe me, this monkey business is a good thing, and it's a really good thing for you." "Good for me?" I said, climbing up on the counter. "What's good about it, Grandpa?" Shoving his hands in his pockets and looking at the floor, Grandpa said, "Well, let's see. To begin with, you've been wanting a pony and a 22, haven't you?" "I sure have," I said. "I've been wanting a pony and a 22 ever since the day I was born. Every boy in the hills has a pony and a gun but me. But things like that cost so much money. It doesn't look like I'll ever have them." "Oh, I wouldn't say that," Grandpa said. "If things go right, you could be riding and shooting before you know it." "Aw, Grandpa," I said, feeling sort of sorry for myself. How am I ever going to get enough money to buy a pony and a 22?" "By catching those monkeys," Grandpa said. "That's how you're going to get it. They're worth a lot of money." "You mean their skins, Grandpa?" I said. "Are monkey skins worth anything?" "No, no," Grandpa said. "Don't even think about skinning them. No, sir, that's the last thing in the world you want to do. They'll have to be taken alive and not harmed in any way." "Taken alive?" I said. "Why, Grandpa, how in the world am I going to do that? I don't know anything about catching monkeys. I've caught coons and possums and skunks and everything else, but not monkeys." Sticking out his chin, Grandpa said, "Well, I'm no monkey expert catcher either, but we're going to have to catch them just the same. There's a big reward being offered for those monkeys." When I heard Grandpa mention reward, I flew completely out of gear. "Reward?" I said, jumping up down from the counter. "How much is it?" "Now, wait a minute," Grandpa said, holding out his hand. "Don't rush me." He paused before going on. "About a week ago, two men stopped here in the store," he said. "Those folks belong to the circus train, and that there was a wreck over on the railroad. From what they told me, it must have been a pretty bad wreck. One of the cars jumped the track and busted wide open. There were some valuable monkeys in that car, and a lot of them got away." Grandpa caught his breath and he said, "A few of the little fellows were killed in the wreck, but not many. The ones that lived were so scared to death that they took off running through the hills, now that the circus was coming out of the winter quarters and had a pretty tight schedule laid out for the season. They didn't have much time between stops, but the crew did manage to lay over for a few days. They caught all but 30 of the monkeys, and I'm pretty sure those are the ones that you and Rowdy ran into." "Grandpa," I said, "if those monkeys are the ones that got away from the circus train, how do you suppose that they got all the way over here? It's 8 miles from our place to the railroad." "I've been thinking about that," Grandpa said. "You know, this time of year is hot and dry in the hills. I expect that the monkeys were having a tough time finding food and water. Now, all the animals have instincts to tell them where to find food and water. Those monkeys probably just kept going until they wound up over in those Cherokee bottoms. There's food of all kinds for them over here: wild grapes, berries, nuts, acorns, roots, and all kind of green stuff." "I'll bet you're right, Grandpa," I said. Rubbing his hands together and looking as pleased as a fox in a henhouse, Grandpa said, "Just wait until you hear about the reward. All those monkeys but one are worth $2 apiece. How does that sound to you?" "$2 apiece!" I cried. "Boy, Grandpa, that's a lot of money. How come they're offering such a big reward for a bunch of little old monkeys?" "They're not just little old monkeys," Grandpa said. "They've been trained for acts in the circus, and that's why they're so valuable. It takes a long time to train a monkey, but you haven't heard the half of it. You're overlooking something important." "Overlooking?" I said. "What am I overlooking, Grandpa?" As if he were put out with me, Grandpa snorted and said, "Well, use your head and think a little. Remember everything I told you about those monkeys and do a little figuring." Grandpa knew that I wasn't too good with figures, and he was all the time making up some kind of old arithmetic problem for me to work on. It always made me feel bad when he did this because I never intended to be anything but a hunter or an explorer, and I couldn't see where arithmetic had anything to do with that. "Grandpa," I said, "with all this talk about monkeys and money, I can't even see good, much less do any thinking. What what is it that I'm overlooking?" Grandpa snorted like Sally Gooden did when she had seen a booger. "That's the last monkey," he said. "I told you they were offering the $2 reward for all the monkeys but one." "Oh," I said, looking sheepish. "I forgot about that monkey. Why is he so important?" "Important," Grandpa said. "The most important monkey in the whole works. He's worth his weight in gold. They're offering $100 reward for him." When I heard Grandpa mention that $100 reward, I lost my breath completely. My throat got dry as ashes under Mama's old washpot, and I had a heck of a time swallowing. I finally got a hold of myself and said in a loud whisper, $100 for one monkey? Suffering cornmeal Johnny, Grandpa. That must have been some monkey. Grandpa chuckled and said, from what those fellows said, that monkey is so smart he's almost human. He's different than the other monkeys. Let's see now, what kind of monkey did that fellow say he was? Oh, yes, he's a chimpanzee or something like that. Anyhow, they're offering $100 reward for him. I couldn't get over it. $100, I exclaimed. $100 for one monkey? Why, if I could catch all of them, I'd have more money than the United States Bank has in it. Just about, Grandpa said, chuckling, and I think we'd better keep this monkey business to ourselves. If word gets out, every farmer in these hills will quit farming and start hunting those monkeys. We can't have that at all. We sure can, I agreed. I won't say a word to anybody. This is the first time in my life that I've had a chance to earn any money, but what's bothering me is catching those monkeys. How am I going to do that? Right now, I don't know, Grandpa said, but we're going to catch them just the same. There never was an animal that could be caught. There never was an animal that couldn't be caught. All that we have to do is figure it out. Grandpa put his thinking cap on and started mumbling and grumbling. I couldn't understand one word he was saying. It always tickled me when Grandpa got something heavy like that on his mind. He did all sorts of things. Sometimes he started walking up and back, then he might start shuffling around in a circle. He had a habit of pulling on the lobe of his right ear, rubbing his nose, or digging the wiry whiskers on his chin. I had learned a long time ago that when my grandpa had a thinking cap on, the best thing for me to do was be patient and, above all, not to say anything. So I just stood there with monkeys, dollars, ponies, and 22s running across my head and waited while Grandpa cut all kinds of dittos. I could almost feel the idea when it hit Grandpa. Looking very pleased with himself, he smiled and said, I think I've got it figured out. You know, you can almost figure anything out if you use your head a little bit. I didn't like the way Grandpa looked at me when he said, use your head a little bit, but I didn't say anything. Walking over to the hardware part of the store, Grandpa picked up 6 small steel traps and a piece of bale wire. Coming back, he looked at me and said, I've got some old meal sacks in the storeroom. Go back there and get one of them. I flew to the storeroom and got the stacks, wondering what in the world Grandpa was going to do. Grandpa took a pair of scissors and started cutting long strips about 2 inches wide from the soft material. Down, he said. Taking the wire in with both hands, I started wrapping the springs as Grandpa had told me. I was so excited and nervous I couldn't do anything right. Once I almost wrapped one of Grandpa's fingers in the spring. Take it easy, Grandpa barked. I don't want my fingers cut off with the wire. We've got plenty of time. Those monkeys won't run away. I'm sorry, Grandpa, I said, rubbing his work-calloused fingers with my hand. Thinking about those monkeys and all that money had me so worked up I can't do anything right. Why, if I could catch them all, I'd have more money than that Rockefeller man. Grandpa laughed and said, I don't know about that. I understand he has an awful lot of money. Once the spring was securely wired, the jaws of the trap were free and useless. Taking one of the cloth strips, Grandpa started wrapping the jaws. I saw right away what his idea was. With all that soft padding on the jaws of the trap, it probably wouldn't hurt the monkey's paw at all. Just to let Grandpa know I was using my head a little bit, I said, Boy, Grandpa, that sure is a good idea. Why, with the jaws of this trap like that, the monkey wouldn't even know it was on his foot. I think he'd know it was on his foot, all right, Grandpa said. But once he gets in it, I don't think there's much he can do to get out. After the jaws of the trap had been wrapped, Grandpa unwound the wire of the spring and released it. Holding the trap in one of his hands and inspecting his work, he grunted and said, It looks like a pretty good job to me. What do you think about it? It looks all right to me, Grandpa, I said. I don't see how it could ever hurt a monkey's foot. Laying the trap down on the floor, Grandpa mashed the spring down with his foot and set the trigger. You tested it out, I said. How are we going to do that, Grandpa? With a twin finger in it. I didn't even answer, Grandpa. I didn't have to. My actions spoke for me. Closing both my hands, I put them behind me and stepped back. Grandpa grunted and said, What's the matter? Don't you think I know what I'm doing? Sure, Grandpa, I said. I think I know what you're doing all right. But I had my finger in a trap once, and believe me, it hurt. Why couldn't we just poke it with a stick? No, Grandpa said, eyeing the trap and rubbing his nose. It wouldn't do any good to poke it with a stick. We wouldn't know any more than we do now. For several seconds, we both stood there in silence, looking at the trap. Rowdy knew that something was going on and got curious. He eased over and took a look at the trap for himself. One look was all he wanted. He started backing up like a crawdad. Then, sticking his tail between his legs, he disappeared behind some boxes. I couldn't help smiling at old Rowdy's actions. He had gotten his paw stuck in a trap once, and he had never forgotten. Grandpa broke the silence by saying, "Well, we're not getting anywhere by just standing here. It still has to be tested. Now I'm going to poke my finger into it, but like it at all." "Well, here goes," Grandpa said. Closing his eyes, he reached over and tripped the trigger with his finger. It snapped and Grandpa jumped. I closed both my eyes and gritted my teeth, and I didn't open again until I heard Grandpa chuckling. "That's just about the best monkey trap catching trap I've ever seen," he said. "It didn't hurt a bit. I hardly felt it." All excited, I helped Grandpa get the trap off his finger. Then, working together, we wrapped the jaws of the other 5 traps. Handing the traps to me, Grandpa said, "Well, it looks like you're in the monkey catching business. Let me know how you come out." I told him I would, and I thanked him with all my heart for helping me. Calling to Rowdy, I started for home. Just as I reached the door, Grandpa said, "Hey, are you sure your mother didn't want something from the store?" My heart almost stopped beating. Digging Mama's list from my pocket, I said, "Boy, Grandpa, I'm sure you're glad you reminded me. If I had gone home without the things Mama wanted, she'd make sure I'd wear as a girl's bonnet for a week. That's what she usually does when I forget something." Taking the list, Grandpa smiled and said, "Well, that's what grandpas are for, isn't it, to look out for boys?" I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. My old grandpa knew how I felt about him. While Grandpa was putting the things Mama wanted into a gunny sack, I thought of something. "Grandpa," I asked, "where am I going to set my traps?" "I believe I'd go right back to where you saw that monkey," he said. "If they're not in that bur oak tree, they're around there somewhere. Rowdy will help you find him." On hearing Grandpa say his name, Rowdy whined and his tail started fanning the air. Grandpa looked at him, grinned, and said, "Say that again, partner. I didn't understand you. Do you want something?" Rowdy really told Grandpa that he wanted something. His deep voice made the tin cans dance on the shelves. Grandpa grunted and walked to the rear of the store. When he came back, he had a meat rind on his hand. Handing it to Rowdy, he smiled and said, "Here you are, fellow. That's one." "Grandpa," I said, "do you think I could use bait when I set my traps?" "Bait?" Grandpa said. "Now, I hadn't thought of that. Yes, I believe I would." "I don't know what monkeys like to eat," I said. "What kind of bait would you use?" "Well, let's see," Grandpa said. "I'm not much of candy for Daisy and me," and it was the one item that would never find its way on Papa's bill. "Here you are," Grandpa said, handing me the groceries. "The next time you're up this way, I hope to see a sack full of monkeys." Putting the traps in my gunny sack, I said, "You will, Grandpa, and one of them will be that $100 monkey. He's the Jasper I want to catch."